I'm going to go to Gareng in a minute because he wrote an article about 2 weeks or so ago, just really talking broadly about some of the chaos that has been reigning at our soccer stadiums. But let me start with Richard. Richard, your thoughts on this matter? Is it rearing its ugly head again?
Well, we do seem to be seeing more incidents in the last 18 months than we had seen for a couple of years. And worryingly, a lot of it seems to be with Orlando Pirates fans. I think that is particularly noted because the chairman of Pirates is the chairman of the league, and I think that makes it embarrassing aside from worrying and illegal activity. I think the league really needs to take a firm lead in this matter, and Dr. Khoza needs to, as the chairman of both the club and the league, be setting the example. We have an act in place, the Safety at Sport and Recreational Events Act. We proved during 2010 that we can police events, but nowadays we see missiles, bottles, all the old problems that were blighting our soccer before 2010. We're seeing that kind of thing again, and we're seeing fans able to behave in ways that we hoped would not be possible anymore, with better policing and more, if you like, intelligent policing and stewardship at games. So I think what we've seen in the last few weeks at a couple of clubs, but particularly Pirates, is an early warning that we in football and the PSL as a whole need to act swiftly. Otherwise, we could be going backwards instead of forwards.
And when we talk about missiles and bottles, people may say, well, I mean, what is that? That's not a big issue. Until we have another Stampede, until we have another Ellis Park. As you say, it's important to nip it in the bud, and you don't let it get bigger.
Bottles are a big issue, though. I mean, we laugh at the English when they banned vuvuzelas, that plastic, and we think, thank goodness we're in Africa and we're not so paranoid. But a bottle, there's a photograph going around of one of the photographers being led, dazed away from the field. He's bleeding, his head's bandaged. Next, it'll be an assistant referee. Next, it'll be a player out on the wing. A bottle can hit a player. And then we'll be wringing our hands and saying, this is terrible. Let's sort it out now. Meant to be closed-circuit TV cameras and all those sort of things so that we can control fan behavior better. We've got a lot of improved venues where that should also facilitate better control of crowds, but we don't seem to be getting that crowd control element right. And it's not easy, but there have been things put in place. There is a national act that also directs us, and we need to respect that, do something about it now. Because, as you say, one day we have a much bigger drama. We have funerals. We all feel terrible in football again, and we say never again.
But is it a policing issue?
Have that never again.
So, is it a policing issue, do you think, Richard?
It's partly a policing issue. I think it's football's issue too, and I think football and Connie will probably say something about this. I think it's a difficult relationship to build, a working relationship with the police, that people understand their roles and you get that cooperation. We saw with Ellis Park, there was real confusion, and the policing left a lot to be desired. But within the stadium and that, it's also incumbent on the clubs, which is why they get into trouble. And I think the time for suspended sentences on clubs must be over, and really big fines need to start being paid. And part of the punishment must also be, clubs must be seen to be taking steps to ensure that within the stadiums which they play, it's less possible for that kind of crowd misbehavior. One rider, I would add, is difficult for clubs because we don't have stadium ownership in this country. So that is an added barrier to success, perhaps. But we can't use that as an excuse. We use the stadia, we pack them, we take the money from the people coming into the stadium. We owe it to the majority of fans to keep them safe. We owe it to everyone else in football, to the various stakeholders, not to have these violent incidents.
Somebody who wrote exactly on the same issue. In fact, your article was headlined, "Gareng crowd control has been lost." That's the argument you're putting forward here.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Richard. I mean, during the World Cup, we didn't see any such behavior from fans, simply because there was proper crowd control. The police were deployed everywhere. The security people were deployed among the crowd. So, aside from the World Cup final, when one fan jumped onto the pitch and ran and attempted to get to the World Cup trophy, I don't recall any incident which could have gone undetected by the security officials who were there. And even that incident itself, I remember the security people were alert and they were able to stop that guy from touching the World Cup trophy. So we have regressed in terms of our local football, as I said in my article, because we are seeing incidences which can easily be avoided. You can preempt that something is going to happen. You know that the Sundowns have lost 2 matches going into the next match. So you need to have proper security around that planning and saying if they lose again, we know that these fans have a history of harassing coaches. So you can put those measures in place before and preempt these things. In the case of Pirates, for instance, when it happened for the first time when they won the league, we could understand it. But then it happened again when they won the Telkom knockout in Durban, and they won the league again in Durban, and it happened. So it tells us of a league which doesn't plan properly. Obviously, they are not police people, but they need to engage municipalities. When we have had one incident and then it repeats 6 months down the line, it tells of a league which fails to plan.
Connie, how do you respond then to all of these accusations? Because clearly you have facilities now that are easy to police, given the upgrade to some of the facilities, stadia that we have now compared to the period prior to 2010.
Look, I tend to agree with both gentlemen on the issue of spectator misbehavior. However, when it comes to certain celebrations, you want to let the fans express themselves from an excitement space, not from a violent space. So the one thing that I can say clearly is that prevention is our number one priority, as well as the safety of both the fans and the supporters, and the players. But what we've seen in the last, I would say, last month per se, is totally unacceptable. We strongly condemn it as a PSL, because what we're trying to also do is to create a family setup. We'd like families to come to the stadium. Now, if you've got people coming in with bottles, and our security, for that matter, are not seeing it, because they tend to hide these bottles and, make all sorts of things, just to make sure. But that, again, is not allowed.
Wow. There are 2 things that are coming out. In fact, let me just pick up on the security issue, because if you look at the article by Nkaring, he's talking about security that is incompetent. They can't tell you where to go. They have absolutely no idea of how to control the crowd.
I would not say they're incompetent. What I would say is that perhaps the number. Remember, what we need to also define here is that when it comes to league games, we actually leave it to the clubs to run the actual match, although the PSL is there. And then when it comes to cup games, you'll see there's much bigger security there. But we don't blame our clubs. What we're saying is that right now we've actually started an engagement with the police when it comes to policing and grading matches, and so that we prevent the actual fans from being hooligans, if I may call them that. But also we do subscribe to the FIFA Fair Play Code, which one of the things that it talks about is the respect and also the observing the laws of the game, but also reject violence during the sport. So we actually are in consultation. In fact, the past week we've been quite engaged with the police, the municipalities, and in fact we're also engaging the media, because we're saying to the media, from a communication space, you need to help us spread that message that we will not tolerate this unruly behavior by fans. And it's a number of fans that do this. But also one of the measures that we're looking at is those CCTVs as well as broadcast houses, making sure that they zoom into the faces of these particular starters, because you may find that it's one person or a group of 5, who just go there. But and they tend to hide because the club gets charged, and then the club gets disciplined. What happens to the fans? Now, that's the reason why we engage in the police, because we do have an act that actually allows us to work with the police and also encourage the police to arrest on the spot, because we can't just leave it and say, well, it happens in Europe. We know that there are top 10 countries in Europe that have fan hooliganism, but we do not want to be in that space in South Africa.
But again, Nkaring, firstly, I would like to know from you whether those responses from Connie are satisfactory to you. But before you respond, Connie, the issue is, and it came through from what Richard was saying a little earlier on, that punish those teams and punish them in a way that they will ensure that it doesn't happen again in the future.
We do punish the teams. But what happens to the spectators? You know, so obviously teams have got branches. That's their role to go and engage in their branches. But what we're then saying is that you can't hide behind your team and say, if it's a particular team that's charged and disciplined and fined, because they're not fined cheap money. It's actually generally about 250,000 rand. Excuse me. But when it comes to an unruly fan, they don't really care because they know that nothing's going to happen to them. So what we're then saying is that you, the very person, will be named and you'll be shown. And if it means going to court and the judge bans you from coming to the stadium, that will happen. And that's what we're trying to do right now, to say we have to nip it in the bud, as Richard has said.
Karen?
Well, it's good to hear that the PSL are thinking of banning fans as well. But if we talk about the 250,000 rand fine for a club like Mamelodi Sundowns, who spend millions on players, it's nothing really. It doesn't really make a difference. And the fans will know that the club has got a billionaire bankrolling it, so he's going to pay that. And they're going to do it again next year. I mean, this incident of Johan Niskins, the fans calling for him to be fired, it was not the first. We know that it happened to Henri Michel, it happened to Todd Moloto, it happened to Gordon Igeson at the same stadium at Lucas Moripe. So it has happened many times. I don't know how finding a club like 200,000 rand, how that is going to stop. I would be in favor of more drastic measures against a club, so that the fans can also feel the pinch. If you introduce a rule to say if your club does that and repeats it in the same year, then we drop you, let's say, 3 points, 2 points, it's gonna affect the fans because they want to see their team winning something. So you have a situation whereby we are fining these clubs, but they are repeating. And as Connie said, the fans come back to do the same thing a few months down the line. So even if you arrest them, they could be released and then they can return. And it would be difficult to police